They thought they could humiliate him. They thought they could trap him, twist his words, and make a joke out of a Hollywood legend. But what they didn't realize, Clint Eastwood doesn't play by their rules. The moment he walked onto the set, the tension in the room was undeniable. The host, a well-known progressive firebrand, had one goal tonight: take Clint down. Make him look outdated, weak, out of touch. He was supposed to stumble, supposed to crack under pressure. Instead, he did what he does best. He stayed calm. He let them dig their own grave. And when the time was right, he fired back with a response so cold, so sharp, so undeniably true that the entire internet erupted. Within hours, the clip was viral. Within days, the network was in full damage control mode. Because Clint Eastwood didn't just win that interview, he exposed everything wrong with the media and made sure the world was watching. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's get started. The invitation seemed routine. A simple sit-down interview, a conversation about Clint Eastwood's career, his views on Hollywood, and maybe a few political questions thrown in. At least, that's how they pitched it. But Clint had been in this business long enough to know a setup when he saw one. The host, Ethan Cole, wasn't just any talk show personality. He was one of the loudest voices in liberal media, a man known for ambushing conservative guests, twisting their words, and forcing them into viral gotcha moments. And tonight, Clint Eastwood was his next target. From the moment Clint walked onto the set, the energy was off. The smiles were a little too forced, the audience a little too rehearsed. They weren't here to listen. They were here to watch a takedown. As Clint took his seat, he caught a glance at Ethan's stack of cue cards. He wasn't preparing for a discussion. He was loading ammunition. The first few minutes were standard. Talk about his legendary films, a few jokes about his cowboy days, but then the shift. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His expression turned smug, predatory. Clint, you've built your career playing tough guys. But let's be honest. Do you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? There it was. A ripple of anticipation spread through the audience. A few quiet chuckles. They knew where this was going. Clint didn't blink. He sat back, calm as ever. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice steady. Ethan smirked, sensing his moment. "I mean, let's face it. Movies like yours glorify a version of manhood that, frankly, doesn't fit today's world. Do you really think society still needs guys who solve problems with a clenched jaw and a six-shooter?" The audience laughed on cue. The trap was set. They wanted Clint to fumble, to hesitate, to admit that he was outdated. But they forgot one thing. Clint Eastwood isn't the kind of man who backs down from a fight. He wasn't here to be their punching bag. He was here to remind them exactly why men like him built Hollywood in the first place. And his response? It was about to make history. For a second, Clint Eastwood didn't respond. He simply sat there, the bright studio lights bouncing off the deep lines on his face. His expression? Unmoved. But Ethan Cole? He wasn't waiting. "Come on, Clint," he continued, flashing that practiced, media-trained smirk. "You really think society still needs guys who solve problems with their fists? The whole strong, silent cowboy thing might have worked in the 60s, but today, people respect intelligence, emotional depth. Don't you think it's time to retire the tough guy act?" The audience chuckled. Loudly. Too loudly. Clint glanced toward them, taking in the rehearsed reactions, the smug grins. He'd seen this before. They weren't here for a conversation. They were here for a performance. Ethan leaned in, sensing an opportunity to push harder. I mean, let's be honest, he continued, flipping through his cue cards. Your movies, you know, Dirty Harry, Gran Torino, Unforgiven, they all send the same outdated message. That violence is the answer. That men shouldn't show weakness. That being tough is more important than being kind. Do you really think that's the kind of influence we need in today's world? The audience erupted into applause. There it was. The loaded question. The setup. The moment designed to make Clint squirm. Any other guest? They might have stumbled, might have tried to soften their stance, apologize, retreat. But Clint Eastwood, he simply tilted his head. You done? He asked, voice flat. Ethan blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. Aye, because if you're done, Clint continued, I'd like to answer the question before you start patting yourself on the back. The audience's laughter cut short. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan forced a chuckle. He wasn't used to losing control. Of course, Clint, he said, leaning back smugly. Go ahead. Tell us why men should still act like cowboys in a world where we have therapy. The crowd roared. More laughter, more claps. But Clint, he wasn't laughing. First off, he said, his tone like gravel scraping against steel, I never said men shouldn't have emotions. That's something you just made up to sound clever. Silence. Ethan opened his mouth, but Clint held up a hand. No, you had your turn. Now it's mine. Ethan shut his mouth. Clint turned toward the audience. Let me ask you folks something. If someone breaks into your house in the middle of the night, do you want a therapist? Or a man who knows how to handle himself? A few cheers, a few nods. Ethan scoffed loudly. Oh, come on, Clint. That's such a cliché argument. We're not talking about home invasions. We're talking about the fact that Hollywood has glorified toxic masculinity for decades. Clint exhaled, leaning back, calm, unbothered. And yet, you don't seem to have a problem glorifying weakness. The room went still. Ethan's smirk faltered. Excuse me? Clint shrugged. Every time I turn on the news, some anchor is lecturing people about how being strong is a bad thing, how toughness is outdated. But let me tell you something, kid. Toughness is why you get to sit in that chair and talk for a living. More murmurs, a few claps. Ethan shifted in his seat. He wasn't expecting pushback. That made sense. He had to regain control. All right, Clint, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Then tell me, what does toughness even mean? Beating people up? Shouting the loudest? Waving a gun around? Because that's what your movies seem to teach. The audience laughed again. Clint just stared at him. No, he said simply. Toughness is standing your ground when people like you try to make you feel small. Silence. For the first time, Ethan didn't have a comeback. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Rachel, the co-host, who had been sitting quietly the entire time, jumped in to save him. Okay, Clint, but let's be real. Your movies haven't exactly aged well. Do you ever think about the impact they've had? I mean, let's face it, your characters wouldn't survive in today's world. Society has moved past that kind of thinking. Clint sighed. Yeah, he said. Well, last time I checked, society also moved past common sense. The audience gasped. Ethan's jaw clenched. The producers were scrambling. The interview wasn't going as planned. Clint wasn't supposed to fight back. But now the audience was paying attention. And the worst part? They were starting to agree with him. Ethan knew it. He had to shut this down. Fast. All right, "All right," he said. "I think we've heard enough cowboy wisdom for one night." He waved to the camera. "When we come back, we'll talk to a real expert, someone who understands the psychology behind America's obsession with hypermasculinity." The crowd groaned. They didn't want a real expert. They wanted to hear more from Clint. The producers cut to commercial, but it was too late. Because while the cameras stopped rolling, the internet was just getting started. The network cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. As the cameras went dark, Ethan Cole ripped out his earpiece, turning to his producers, his smile replaced with a tight-lipped scowl. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Clint Eastwood, unbothered. He sat back, tapping his fingers against the armrest, watching the meltdown unfold. Rachel, the co-host, leaned in, whispering urgently, "We need to wrap this segment early. This isn't working." Ethan shook his head. No way. We're finishing this. He's not leaving here looking like the good guy." But that's exactly what was happening. In the few short minutes of the break, something unexpected started brewing online. A clip from the interview, unedited, raw, was already circulating on Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube. Someone from the live audience had recorded it on their phone and uploaded it instantly. The caption: "Clint Eastwood shuts down liberal host on live TV. Watch him make the guys sweat." And in the comments, people weren't mocking Clint. They were rooting for him. Ethan thought he was going to humiliate a legend. Instead, he got schooled. Notice how Clint never loses his cool. That's real toughness. Host tried so hard to sound smart, but he just ended up proving Clint's point. By the time the show came back from commercial, the tide had already turned. "Live on air, the final showdown." "Welcome back," Ethan said, forcing a chuckle. "We're here with Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood having a, let's say, spirited conversation about masculinity and its place in today's world." Clint didn't respond. He just waited. Ethan was nervous now. He could feel it. The shift in the room. The audience wasn't eating out of his hand anymore. But he still had one card left to play. The smear card. "Clint," Ethan started, "some people would say that your movies, your entire brand really, represent a kind of toxic, outdated mindset. That you glorify violence. That you romanticize a world where men don't have to evolve. How do you respond to that?" A trap. Clint didn't blink. "I'd say those people don't know what the hell they're talking about." Gasps. Then, applause. Ethan's face twitched. He wasn't expecting that. He wasn't expecting support. "You know what toughness really is?" Clint continued, his voice calm, steady. "It's not about starting fights. It's about finishing them. It's about standing your ground. When people like you tell you that being strong is a problem." More claps. Ethan tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Clint. We're talking about the bigger picture here." Clint tilted his head. "Are we? 'Cause it sounds to me like you're just trying to make me apologize for being who I am." Another ripple through the crowd. Rachel jumped in, desperate to get control back. "No one's saying you have to apologize, Clint. We're just asking, don't you think the world has changed?" Clint leaned forward. "The world changes all the time. But human nature, that stays the same. People still need discipline. People still need resilience. People still need strength." He let the words settle. "And if you think that's outdated, then maybe you should ask yourself why the people running things right now are doing such a lousy job." The audience erupted. This wasn't just a discussion anymore. This was a moment. Rachel glanced at Ethan, panic in her eyes. They had lost control of the room. The internet erupts. Meanwhile, Twitter was in chaos. The live feed was being clipped, edited, and shared in real time. Ethan Cole just got owned by Clint Eastwood. Watch how he flips the argument back on them. This is why Hollywood needs more guys like Clint. They wanted to humiliate him. Instead, he made them look like amateurs. Even people who didn't usually agree with Clint were admitting it. I'm no conservative, but damn, the guy handled that interview like a boss. Say what you want about Eastwood, but at least he's not fake. These hosts. Cringe. The network's social media team was in full meltdown mode. The hosts crack under pressure. Back in the studio, Ethan tried one last desperate move. All right, Clint, let's be real. You've had a great career. But at your age, do you really think you still understand what's relevant? Maybe it's time to step aside and let the next generation take over. The audience booed. Ethan's face went pale. That wasn't supposed to happen. Clint, he just smiled. You know what's funny about guys like you, Ethan? He said, leaning back. You spend all this time telling people like me that we're outdated. But you're the one afraid of a real conversation. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. Rachel threw up her hands. Oh my God, Clint, no one's afraid of you. Really? Clint said. Then why are you sweating? The audience roared. Rachel turned red. Ethan gritted his teeth. The producers signaled to wrap it up. The interview was officially a disaster for them. Because Clint Eastwood, he had just won. The aftermath. A full-blown media meltdown. By the time the cameras cut, the damage was irreversible. Sponsors were backing away. Producers were yelling in the control room. Ethan's credibility in freefall. Meanwhile, Clint, he walked off the set like nothing happened. No social media statement, no damage control, no follow-up interview. He didn't need to explain himself, because the truth, it spoke for itself. The interview was over, but the real battle had just begun. Before the studio lights had even cooled, the internet was on fire. Clint Eastwood shuts down liberal talk show host on live TV. Ethan Cole left speechless after Eastwood's epic comeback. They tried to humiliate him. Instead, they just ended their own careers. Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, the clip was everywhere. Viral reactions, he made them look like fools. Within minutes, reaction videos started flooding YouTube. Popular streamers, political commentators, even celebrities were weighing in. That's how you handle the media. Calm, collected, and absolutely savage. Ethan thought he was going to dunk on Eastwood, but the guy's been outwitting people for decades. Notice how Clint never lost his cool? Meanwhile, Ethan was sweating bullets. Even people who didn't usually agree with Clint were impressed. Look, I'm no Eastwood fan, but this was a masterclass in shutting down media manipulation. Say what you want about him, but he's real. These talk show hosts, not so much. The tide had completely turned. Sponsors start dropping. We don't want the heat. Behind the scenes, the network was in full meltdown mode. Phone calls from angry executives, emails from sponsors demanding answers, producers scrambling for damage control. By morning, the first major sponsor released a statement. We are reevaluating our partnership with the network. We stand by respectful and balanced journalism. Translation? They were pulling out. By noon, 3 more sponsors followed. Advertisers wanted nothing to do with this mess. And without sponsors, the network was bleeding money. Fast. Other celebrities and politicians speak out. Then came the second wave of backlash. Big names in Hollywood, some of them Eastwood's old co-stars, came to his defense. Clint's been around longer than these TV hosts have been alive, and he still makes more sense than all of them combined. Famous actor tweet. That wasn't an interview, that was an ambush, and they got exactly what they deserved. Well-known director. Even politicians got involved. This is why people don't trust the media anymore. They don't want a debate. They want a takedown. Clint Eastwood just did more for free speech in one interview than most people do in a lifetime. And just like that, the network wasn't just losing viewers, they were losing credibility. The media tries damage control, but it backfires. By now, the network knew they had to respond. Ethan Cole went on Twitter, posting a half-hearted statement. Healthy debate is important. I respect Mr. Eastwood's views, even if I disagree. Let's keep the conversation civil. But no one bought it. The responses were brutal. You didn't want a debate. You wanted to embarrass him, and you failed. Don't act like you respect him now. You were smirking the whole time until he shut you down. Nice try, Ethan, but the internet remembers. Meanwhile, the network's official page turned off comments. Too late. The damage was done. Ethan Cole's career begins to crumble inside the network. Executives were panicking. Their golden boy, the host they had groomed for years, was now their biggest liability. His show's ratings plummeted overnight. Viewers were boycotting sponsors. His own colleagues were distancing themselves. Ethan's a talented journalist, but this situation could have been handled differently. Co-host's weak defense. Translation? They were throwing him under the bus. By the end of the week, network insiders leaked that executives were considering replacing him. Ethan had become radioactive. The man who once prided himself on exposing guests had just exposed himself. Clint Eastwood's response. Just 3 words. As all of this was unfolding, reporters were desperate for a response from Clint. They reached out for interviews. They called his representatives. They begged for a statement. Finally, at a small charity event, a reporter managed to catch up with him. Mr. Eastwood, any thoughts on what's happening to Ethan Cole and the network? Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and simply said, they did it themselves. Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood sums up the entire situation in 3 words. He's not just a legend in movies, he's a legend in real life. Meanwhile, Ethan is somewhere crying into his soy latte. And just like that, the story was over. Clint had nothing to prove, because while the media spent years trying to control the narrative, this time, they lost. The media firestorm should have been the end of it. The network was bleeding viewers. Ethan Cole's career was in freefall, and the internet had made up its mind. Clint Eastwood won. But Clint, he wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about one bad interview. This was about a corrupt system that had been doing this for years. And now, it was time to make them pay. Clint Eastwood files a lawsuit. This goes beyond me. The legal papers were filed just days after the interview. The lawsuit, defamation, media misconduct, and reputational harm. But the real bombshell. The lawsuit wasn't just against Ethan Cole. It was against the entire network. The claim? They had knowingly and deliberately set up Clint Eastwood. They manipulated audience reactions and edited footage to fit a false narrative. They engaged in a pattern of media bias, targeting individuals they disagreed with. The filing wasn't just legal, it was a declaration of war. Clint wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone the media had ever tried to silence. Leaked emails, expose the network, make sure he looks bad. The lawsuit alone was bad news for the network. But what happened next? It was a death sentence. An anonymous whistleblower, a former producer from the network, leaked internal emails. And what they revealed? Absolute corruption. The emails showed that the entire interview was scripted in advance. Producers had planned the gotcha questions weeks before. Staff were instructed to cut Clint off, twist his words, and make him stumble. Audience reactions were prearranged. Producers told them when to laugh, clap, and boo. And then, the worst one. An email from Ethan Cole to his producers. Make sure he looks bad. No matter what. Boom. This wasn't journalism, this was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Social media erupts. This was never about honest reporting. The leaked emails spread like wildfire. So it was never a real interview? They planned to humiliate him? The media is corrupt to the core. Clint was right all along. How many other guests have they done this to? The network tried to contain the damage. They issued a vague statement. We take these allegations seriously and will conduct an internal review. But no one believed them. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. And now, people were paying attention. The network starts to collapse. No one wants to be associated with us. Inside the network, panic set in. Major advertisers pulled their contracts. Executives were grilled in emergency board meetings. Even other journalists distanced themselves. One well-known anchor from a rival network called them out directly. This is why people don't trust the media anymore. When you stage an attack instead of conducting an interview, you deserve to lose everything. By the end of the week, stock prices plummeted. Viewership hit an all-time low. The network's credibility was shattered. And then, the resignations started. Network insiders turn against Ethan Cole. We were told to target him. With the lawsuit gaining traction, more insiders started speaking out. A former producer went on the record. An ex-staffer leaked internal memos. Even an audience member came forward, revealing they were coached on when to react. And the worst part, it wasn't just Clint Eastwood. Other conservative guests had been set up the same way. Politicians, actors, business leaders, anyone who didn't align with their views was a target. The media had been manufacturing these moments for years. But now, they were finally being exposed. The final blow. The network settles out of court. Faced with a losing battle, the network tried to settle. And Clint? He didn't back down. The final terms? A massive multi-million-dollar settlement, a full public apology admitting wrongdoing, permanent termination of key executives involved in the setup. Ethan Cole, fired, gone, erased. Once a media darling, he was now a cautionary tale. The man who built his career destroying others had just destroyed himself. Clint Eastwood's final words. This isn't just about me. At a press conference after the settlement, reporters swarmed Clint, asking for his reaction. His response? This was never just about me. He looked out at the cameras, his voice steady. This is about the truth, and the truth always wins. Mic drop. The clip instantly viral. Clint Eastwood just took down an entire network and barely broke a sweat. A living legend. The media will never recover from this. This is what real strength looks like. And just like that, the fight was over. But the message? It was just beginning. Because now, the media knew that the American people weren't falling for their tricks anymore. The verdict was in. Clint Eastwood had won the lawsuit. The network had been exposed. Ethan Cole was finished. But the fallout it was far from over. The network collapses. No one trusts them anymore. For years, the network had been untouchable. They controlled the narrative. They picked the winners and losers. They decided who got to be heard and who was silenced. Not anymore. The Clint Eastwood scandal had ripped the mask off. Ratings plummeted overnight. Viewership dropped by nearly 50%. Major advertisers completely pulled out. Investors dumped stock. And then, the final blow. The network's highest-rated talk show, the one where Ethan humiliated guests for years, cancelled, gone. The official statement? We are restructuring our programming to align with the evolving media landscape. The truth? They were bleeding out. They had spent years manufacturing fake takedowns, but in the end, they had taken down themselves. Ethan Cole vanishes. His career is over. Ethan Cole had once been the golden boy of liberal media. Now he was a joke. His final broadcast, a disaster. The network forced him to issue a public apology. I deeply regret how the interview unfolded. My intention was never to misrepresent Mr. Eastwood's views, and I respect him as an artist and a public figure. Nobody believed it. The comments were brutal. Bro, you weren't misrepresenting him. You were trying to humiliate him and failed. Too late, Ethan. You got caught. Clint Eastwood is still a legend. You're just a footnote. The next day, Ethan Cole resigned. Translation: he was fired. Quietly. No other network wanted to touch him. Just like that, the man who spent his career destroying others had destroyed himself. Clint Eastwood's rise, stronger than ever. And Clint, he was more powerful than ever. The man they tried to cancel, bigger, stronger, undefeated. His classic films surged in popularity. New projects were announced. Support flooded in from fans, actors, and even people who didn't always agree with him. Because at the end of the day, people respected the truth. And Clint, he never backed down. Final message: the truth always wins. A week after the case was settled, Clint was approached by a reporter outside a small-town diner. Mr. Eastwood, do you have any final words about everything that happened? Clint took a sip of his coffee, smirked, then said, just one thing. The truth always wins. The clip instantly viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 4 words. A masterclass in handling the press. He never needed to raise his voice. He just told the truth. If you care about the truth, free speech, and standing up to media corruption, share this video. Because the media wanted you to forget what happened. Don't let them. The end.